Well, John Wick's now out in theaters, and do I have so much to say about it? Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Reception Show. My name is Fariba, and as I mentioned before, I want to talk about John Wick Chapter 4, which is now currently out in theaters and already breaking box office records. Of course, I want to do my own review on this, and let me just say that this is actually my second time recording my movie review because the first one just didn't do justice to what is basically the spectacle of John Wick Chapter 4. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right down to it. So yeah, John Wick has now become this unexpected action franchise. I think as of today, it will mark just about the 9 years since we were first introduced to the assassin John Wick. And I mean, ever since its introduction, it just sparked a 4-film franchise, as well as the fact that we have a couple of spin-offs coming along the way. Now with Chapter 4, it basically continues off of what we saw in Chapter 3. A war is in progress, but in Chapter 3, we do recall that Winston did betray John Wick, but at the end of the day, John Wick has his own vendetta against the High Table, and he's going to do everything he can to regain back his freedom that he once had before the series events. And now he's not going to go do this all alone, right? For this film, he has the unwavering support of Bowery King, who also has his own skirmishes with the High Table. Now, on the other hand, we know the High Table realizes that John Wick is a major threat to their power, so they must do something on their own hands to fully stop John Wick from just, unleashing kind of the worst of the worst on them. Now, going into Chapter 4, there's obviously this big question. Can Chapter 4 even surpass the previous films in terms of its genre quality? Like, when we look into the previous films, things are so full-blown from the action sequences, and even the conundrum from Chapter 4 seems pretty hard to top. Yet, Chapter 4 surprisingly and deservingly succeeds in every way possible by establishing the high stakes this time around, and one that is being evident of what is the grand finale of this action franchise. They really up the action, the stunt work, the choreography, the character development, and as well as the emotionality to what is setting up to the final battle. While the previous films were just great action-packed endeavors where the hero, John Wick, undergoes a new obstacle and retribution to his arc, Chapter 4 felt like it was a fulfilling epic that narrates John's last phase of this hero's journey. You can tell straight up that John is simply done with this whole lifestyle and wants to just wants his predicament to end once and for all. And in doing so, the director made sure that this was told as an epic where we see John's journey through the last phase of, his obstacles, which is intensified by all the people who he does end up encountering and coming after him. Of course, when it comes to the John Wick franchise, the biggest appeal, of course, is the action. There is no denying that. The John Wick franchise manages to stun us with these unique action pieces and top-notch choreography and stunt work, even showing the beauty of it all. But given that we already had 3 other films before this, there is a question of how can Chapter 4 even separate itself and not become overshadowed by its predecessors in terms of its action pieces and not being too repetitive. While Chapter 4 maintains the heart of the action by showing the gunfights, the chase sequences, and hand-to-hand combat, Chapter 4 manages to elevate the quality of the stunt work by diversifying it. While it is not uncommon for Reeves to perform mixed martial arts, Chapter 4 definitely showed the elegance of mixed martial arts to amplify the high stakes that John must undergo. A lot of this is benefited from the locations that they do show, such as Osaka, Paris, and Berlin. So because of this, we get to see this new sense of hand-to-hand combat, weaponry, and unique challenges that John and his allies might undergo, including like the katana fights and the car chase sequences. I mean, there's even a part where we see John Wick literally using nunchucks or the Dragon Breath's gun to add this, new sense of visual to these action sequences. And basically what I'm trying to say is that, they go full scale on the action this time around, like making it as if it's more intense and very high caliber in the choreography and stunt work. I mean, for the most part, it never feels too repetitive, and such action sequences feel intense no matter what the situation is. And also given how over-the-top and ridiculous the action sequences can get, I mean, that's typical of John Wick films, I love that you get the sense of the humor out of it. I remember even laughing in some points of the film, which just shows how the film itself kind of understands, realizes the absurdities that it has, but it blends so well with the action overall. And it becomes quite signature, and they really continue this off by making the action sequences memorizing and remarkable to watch. These action sequences wouldn't have been effective in the way they are if it weren't for the cinematography and visuals. I can't even express how spectacular the visuals are in this film. The camera work is so inventive and breathtaking, and the way that they really show this camera work and complementing it to this action in question. For instance, there's like literally one part where John Wick is literally fighting off all these assassins in the abandoned building, but the way that you're viewing them, you're seeing it from a top-down view, like as if you're seeing it from the ceiling, but it's done so continuously that it just really blows your mind how remarkable that they really put into just really showing like John's attempts to just, you know, undergo this whole journey right here, this whole obstacle. And I mean, it's pretty insane just how much time they dedicate to just having this shot in this form and doing so continuously. And again, when it comes to this, right, it adds so much depth, and it shows so much of the depth as well as the hard work that they put into this film to make sure that, you know, the action scenes are over the top and immersive, and they clearly succeed in that aim. I mean, I have to quickly mention that the sound for this film is just pretty insane as well. Like, it also adds into the immersive experience that I have watching the action sequences. I saw this film in Dolby, so if you haven't seen it already, like, I would highly recommend watching it in Dolby Atmos. Like, view it from that, like, you get the rumbles of it all, and it just adds to this really thrilling experience. Though previous films have always been action heavy with a little substantial plot, this one definitely felt like it was far more dramatic than previous installments. A lot of this is because of the new characters that we meet, which help further chapter 4 in terms of making it far more refreshing than other installments. A lot of times with the John Wick films, because it is so fast paced, the films don't take the time to really polish out the plot. They only just set up the groundwork of what's going on, what is affecting John, and what is basically kind of the tribulations for John. But and just again, the rest of the film is just John, you know, going into action and with a few minutes of like here and there of dialogue, and just again like some development, but nothing too, you know, fleshed out. However, this film like takes a far more, you know, time in establishing the dramatic aspects, which honestly was necessary because again, it was setting up the catalyst of certain moments in film, intensifying kind of the situation and building up to basically the tension and the epic conclusion. A lot of the dramatic sequences and moments really happen because of the new characters that we do meet in this film. Chapter 4 surprisingly adds a large spoonful of new characters while interwoven them with the familiar ones. I mean, for instance, Ian McShane is great as ever as Winston, while, you know, Bill Skarsgård manages to exude the repulsions of this character that is the Marquise. From start to finish, we understand a lot of who the Marquise is, his ambitions, and this is perfectly captured by Skarsgård to the point where we honestly detest this character. Then we have other characters like Koji and Kira who are only there for a brief moment, but they're the father-daughter duo that we meet and who ends up being a big part of John's, you know, mess, setting up basically what is the realities of John's ramifications as a result of, you know, that started off from chapter 2 and then leading up to chapter 3. Then we have far more, you know, mysterious characters like Mr. Nobody or the Tracker, who is brilliantly played by Shamir Anderson. Well, we don't learn much about him because they don't really kind of go to the depths of his character. Like, he is mysterious for a reason. We get a sense of his, you know, complexity and subtleness as a character, and, you know, it gets to the point where even his mixed intentions with what he wants to do with John still makes him quite charming as a character. Of course, the best part of, you know, Mr. Nobody and his character is his dog. Like, what John Wick movie is, you know, without a dog? We have to have a dog in a John Wick movie, right? And of course, the dog that we see in this one's far more vicious and monstrous, which again adds a new refreshing take of like the characters that we do meet. I mean, this one again, like, it just shows how different this dog is from the ones that we've seen before. Like, the one that I would think about, you know, a lot of in terms of comparison is, you know, Halle Berry's dogs, like Sophia's dogs in chapter 3. But again, it just shows again the bond between Mr. Nobody and the dog, which becomes a big part of this film. Like, you're just like, it gets to the point where you are rooting for them and hoping that nothing happens to the dog, or you basically gonna go full-blown John Wick myself. Like, I mean, I was really like worried for that dog. And even then, like, I think that the fact that they added this, you know, relationship between Mr. Nobody and the dog is like a really nice touch, because a lot of it is just an added story, like a reference to just the first film, like where it all started. Like, we even see this before with the Halle Berry stuff and with her dog, where, like, you know, John Wick literally says, I get it. He gets it. Like, the way that he's just, you know, seeing everyone's perspective in different ways and seeing how they exude just a part of him, he understands and acknowledges kind of what they're feeling, and just, you know, from his own experience, like, he makes sure that, yeah, no, I get it. And yeah. again, a really nice touch to it. And it's just showing the understanding of the innocence and the value of companion dogs in this case, which again, John Wick continues to acknowledge in chapter 4. And the way that they handle it's so fruitful. Like, I mean, again, I love it. And I don't want to really go into spoilers, but just say it just really puts a smile on your face at the way that they handle the dog part in this film. Because again, we don't get to see a lot of John's actual dog, but we do get to see, you know, Tracker's dog. But out of all the new characters that we do meet in this film, the one that I think that really shone the most, like even probably far more than John Wick himself, is Donnie Yen as Caine. Now, before this film, I had imagined that Yen's character was going to be like the secondary antagonist, and then it would just work up and build up to becoming the primary antagonist. However, the film kind of defies these, you know, tropes, the action tropes that we typically get, and it brings a far more nuance and empathy to the character that I didn't even imagine ever before. Actually, the film right away establishes who Caine is. Like, he is a blind, you know, assassin, but he's also someone who's been, you know, in a similar position that John Wick has undergone himself. It adds a complexity and vulnerability where even I was just rooting for this character. It just shows that John is not the only person suffering from the ordeal under the high table. And, you know, like John, this guy is just, you know, being sucked back into his professional life if it means protecting the loved one. Now, what makes his character a bit different from John is that Caine brings in the dramatic bits that enhances the storytelling of this perceived epic, right? Despite this situation, you can tell that Caine isn't doing this out of greed, but just pushes the idea that there is this dilemma and the choices that they have to make, but there aren't easy ones. This ends up becoming a big thematic bit in the film where the characters are reflecting upon the consequences, the choices, their definitive fates, a message that builds up to base of the stakes leading up to the finale. And given these thematic bits, right, it helps with John Wick as a character who considers all these issues, needing to realize that his fate may not, you know, work out well after all. And again, like, these thematic bits help to balance out the overarching action by giving us the idea of what the stakes are in this film. And this becomes complicated when you see John and Caine interacting. I have to speak on this dynamic because Caine and John, because their friendship becomes really complicated by the fact that Caine must, you know, undergo this task of his, given the dilemmas and the choices. Yet, despite what these characters must do, you instantly get the depth and their mutuality, as well as the displeasure of what they must do, again, because of the choices that they have to make. And they just don't, and even with all of that, they just don't hold this grudge against each other. Again, I absolutely love how they develop this subplot, because it really builds upon what is going to happen by the operatic endgame to John's arc. And because of that, there is this nuance and subtlety to the themes uncovered. And then let's get down to kind of the final act, because it's purely just 30 to 45 minutes of action, but like great action that is setting up to the grand finale of John's arc. Again, it is just chilling, energetic, over the top, and beautiful to see, just as, you know, John has to go through these last steps before the grand finale. And I will say this, like, the plot is still not the strongest in this film. We don't get a lot of the fleshed out John Wick that we see with other characters, but this is forgiven by the fact that, you know, we're watching John, you know, emotionality through the actual action sequences themselves. The action speaks for what John is feeling in the moment, the anguish, the action, the emotionality, the position that he is in, and also amplifying the energy that he has during those moments. And even then, I will say that some action sequences may have been a bit exhausting. Like, there are times I really just want to take a bit of a breather because there's just so much happening, and that does kind of, you know, is some of the few flaws I may have picked up on with this film. But even then, it feels far much better than what all that we're seeing. Like, it's still very extravagant at the way that they, you know, set up the action pieces in those final moments and throughout the film, right? Because it just leads up to perhaps basically the best ending you can get for John's story. While this series does thrive on the high tempo pacing and the upbeat tone, you do get a sense that chapter 4 is shifting all of that, especially as you get closer and closer to the, you know, final battle. But it works perfectly for this because it defies the expectations that we have by simplifying the action in the final act, but is really highly effective in setting the chilling mood in the ending sequences. Like, I also love that the way they add the Western style to it, which is very apparent in the movie as you get more and more into, like, you know, the ending parts, as you're following with characters like Mr. Nobody, Caine, and John. Like, you get the sense of, like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which, like, but in a more, like, crime world, you know, setting. But it's really innovative, it's really nice, and you get the inspiration out of that as you get more and more to the end of this film. It's also worth mentioning that this movie is about 2 hours and 49 minutes long, which is super long. But again, like, this is a movie where it really takes advantage of its runtime by dedicating a bit more time on the dramatic stuff without having to sacrifice the action spectacle. Like, not a moment felt that the long runtime hurt the movie's momentum, because again, we are seeing what is the epic of John's journey, his story right here. And chapter 4 does slow down a bit here and there than previous films that we've seen before, but again, this helps to set up the atmosphere in the final act that leads to kind of the final, chilling conclusion. The film exceeds in so many ways like never before, and what really makes the experience is just how they managed to conclude John's arc in a really satisfying way. Like, chapter 4's gratifying conclusion to John's arc, and doing so in a way that it handles the action and drama pleasantly without losing kind of the signature touches of the series, is worth applauding that both the director and Reeves really put so much effort and dedication to just crafting this film right here. And it's really clear from the hard work with the stunt, the choreography in this film. Like, the action sequences are next level and high octane. The new characters are very interesting and want you to see more of them. And then chapter 4 ends with a very fulfilling spectacle. And yes, the film is, it isn't all that flawless. There are some flaws here and there. Like, as I mentioned before, some action sequences do feel a bit exhausting, and the plot isn't the strongest and isn't as substantial as we saw with some of the previous films. But even then, like, the pacing and the tone never loses a beat. Plus, the technical aspects are the biggest winners in this film. Again, like, that is just the way that, looking into this film, like, chapter 4 is clearly the best of the franchise, and there's no argument to that. Before I wrap this up, like, I also want to just quickly mention that there is a post-credit scene, which is very unusual for John Wick, but it is very important for the future of the series. It's worth seeing because, again, it circles back to a very significant moment from earlier in the film and keeps you asking questions like, what is going to be the direction of the franchise moving forward? And it is clear that they will try to invest some time in expanding the John Wick universe, like, without John, of course, having, but we already know that we're going to have the Continental spinoff, and then, of course, we're going to have the upcoming spinoff film that is Ballerina, starring Ana de Armas. And I think given this film, like, having, seen some of the characters that we do meet, like, this film really implies that we're going to have even more spinoffs with characters like Mr. Nobody and Kira, although, again, a lot of that is going to depend on if the universe can somehow survive without John Wick. And yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for myself in terms of if there's any potential for John Wick 5. Like, I mean, there is a possibility to it. Like, there's a leeway in how they can still allow this to be possible. I mean, even the director and Reeves have mentioned about this. They've been pretty ambiguous with whether or not they want to do John Wick 5, and it's just a matter of whether, the box office are, the success of the box office and the reception of it all, which, I mean, given what we've seen so far, like, it's been pretty massive. But even then, like, even if this is the final bit, like, if this is the final movie of the John Wick franchise, like, I'm very honestly happy with the product that we do get with this film. It is a phenomenal culmination of John's hero's journey. Like, it seriously is a, epic way to conclude a saga. At the end of the day, like, if I were to really give this rating, like, I would say I would give, like, a really solid 4.5 out of 5. Like, I mean, aside from a couple of nitpicky things like the plot, like, not being as substantial, and some of the action sequences being a bit exhausting, nevertheless, like, this is a very phenomenal film. Like, I mean, it is almost near masterful, and again, like, I would literally go back to see it multiple times. Like, I've actually already seen it a second time already because it's just so phenomenal to watch. And let me just say this, like, my theater was pretty packed for an opening night. Like, I went on a Thursday night at an 8 p.m. showing, and it was packed. Like, people wanted to see this film because there's just something really meaningful about it, and people were hooked. Like, people were just reacting very well to, like, the movie. They were laughing at some points. They were, some points where they were literally, like, disgusted or kind of aggrieved or some things. Like, there was a lot of great, audience emotionality, the response that they got from watching this film, and it just speaks for the fact that this is a very incredible film of its own kind. And again, it's just really entertaining for what it does present on the big screen. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about it. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed John Wick Chapter 4. It is a very great addition to this, the franchise itself. If anything, this is, like, an incredible epic, an incredible conclusion to what is basically the John Wick franchise. Again, like, I can't speak for itself, like, whether or not there's gonna be more of it, but even then, like, if this is the final one, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. What a way to really just end John Wick's story. And I mean, again, like, props to both the director, Reeves, the cast, and crew for really just giving us a masterful action-packed film, especially for a film that is like the third sequel of the franchise, which is very hard to do, and yet they managed to really just accomplish the impossible. So yeah, that's all we have to say about John Wick Chapter 4. What are your thoughts? Have you seen the movie? If not, I'm gonna tell you right now to go see it right away. Like, go right now. It's you do not want to miss it. If you have seen the film, what are your thoughts? Did you enjoy the action sequences in this film? What do you think about the new characters, the plot, the ending, without spoiling too much? How do you think of this in comparison to other films? Did you love this far more? Do you think this is the best one, like everyone else, like even myself is saying? Or do you prefer some of the previous films far more in other aspects? What do you think? Like, is there going to be John Wick Chapter 5? Like, are we gonna get another film, or is this it? Are you excited about the spin-offs? And if so, what are you expecting out of it? And let me know if you have any other thoughts. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.